Freedom. Everyone say freedom. Freedom. That sort of true, real, internal, mental, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, physical, embodied, experienced freedom is something we all want, but not something we all experience, right? It can seem sometimes at best elusive, slippery, just beyond our reach, and at worst sometimes it can feel unattainable. And even beyond that, so worse than worse, sometimes it can feel like you don't deserve it, that you're not worthy of it, and it's just not something that's for you. But in spite of all that, Jesus and the authors of the New Testament, speaking and writing to those early apprentices who faced hardships and battles in their mind and struggles along the way of the human condition, just as you and I, said that not only is it available, it is attainable, it is accessible, and it is accessible through a person and the way and the truth of Jesus. You have some enemies along the way, like fingernails on a chalkboard, like in your life, in your soul. Some of you cringed as soon as I said that. Running up against this, like fingernails on a chalkboard, and acting in direct opposition to your flourishing, your freedom, your joy, your happiness. You have some real enemies of your soul. What teachers of the way of Jesus for millennia have called and kind of categorized as the world, the flesh, and the devil. These two elemental forces, the spirit and truth of Jesus that we talked about in that language last week, versus the enemies of your soul, are clashing in you, they're clashing around you in what some would call spiritual warfare. And this is the tension of your human experience. Yet, the good news, in this tension lies the promise and the journey at the heart of our current series of teachings on finding freedom. Now hit the pause button. For all you at home, you can jump to Amazon really quickly. Here's our weekly infomercial of 2 recommended readings that would be an accessible read, a helpful read. One is from Dallas Willard called Renovation of the Heart, particularly 2 chapters in there on the renovation of the mind, life-changing as it coincides with what we're talking about. The second is C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters. It is a work of satire, of story that gives us kind of this reality of these enemies that we are facing. Now, have any of you heard of the name Ignaz Semelweis? A couple? All right, I love you. I love you guys. Ignaz Semelweis, maybe Semmelweis, I don't know, and probably the more accurate way of explaining it. He was a Hungarian physician who worked in Vienna in the 1850s. I can't believe you guys didn't know that. You didn't know that. You're not up on your Hungarian physicians in Vienna from the late 1800s? He looked after 2 labor and delivery wards in the same hospital. A labor and delivery ward is a bit different terminology than we would have today. Like think a large room where multiple moms and very, very scared men are having babies. And all I can say, having gone through that twice, because, that experience is about me. Having gone through that twice, I am so thankful for private labor and delivery rooms. Can I get a witness? So at that time, that is not, all the guys are like, yes, they didn't see me cry. Everyone didn't else see me cry. Happy cry, not scared cry, or sick to your stomach cry. But anyways, one of the things that did not make sense for this particular physician in the 1850s in his practice that really caused him a lot of grief, a lot of angst, a lot of struggle along the way, is that in one ward, one room, compared to the other, babies being delivered in each room, there was a 20 times higher mortality rate of the babies and the moms from one room to the other. And at the time, this made no rational sense. He couldn't figure it out. He couldn't understand why this was the case. And at first glance, the only difference between the 2 wards is that one was led by an army of female midwives and the other was led by an army of male doctors. But he was pretty sure that wasn't the problem, and it wasn't. It didn't have anything to do with it. In fact, before you think that that's going to be anti-women, it was actually the men that messed it up. So anyways, then one day, he realized that one of the doctors delivering a baby, he physically saw this, had come straight from doing an autopsy. You see, the autopsy table happened to be at the end of one of these labor and delivery wards in the same room where the mortality rate was super high. And that autopsy discovered that the person afflicted with a particular disease found through the autopsy was the same disease that many of the women, after giving birth, were dying of. In investigating this further, he realized that more often than not, these doctors, were going from working with the dead, doing autopsies, straight to delivering children. No washing of hands, no antiseptics, no change of clothing, no PPE, none of those things. Nothing. And science couldn't prove this at the time because they didn't have microscopes or anything yet. But he was one of the forefathers that discovered the germ. He discovered, in a certain sense, the more he thought about it, wrote about it, what became known as germs. You couldn't see them by the naked eye, but these are the things that were prolific and are prolific and were actually causing death on one end of the ward and affecting where life could be on the other. When I heard this story recently, I thought, wow, this is the spiritual world that we've been talking about. Not in some creepy or obsessive way, but in a very real way. This is like the realm of the devil that we've been learning to deal with over the last few weeks. You know it's there, but you can't see it. You feel it, not like a haunted house stuff, but you feel it through loss and pain and brokenness and failed relationships that weren't anticipated. And this invisible realm has a creature that Jesus says is very powerful and very real. And it is something that as it operates, it causes death and it affects and disrupts our flourishing. At first, no one believed Iggy, as I come to call him, Ignaz Semelweis, because you couldn't prove it scientifically until 100 years later with the microscope. And when that happened, it revealed he was 100% accurate. Indeed, although it couldn't be seen at the time, something sinister was going on. In the same way, this not seen but very real world, very real enemy is very real for you and I. It was for Jesus, and it is for us today. And for some of you, you've experienced it in very clear, overt, obvious, dare I say, even like demonic or paranormal ways, as goofy as that sounds for many of us. Like you've experienced it that way. For a lot of us, and for some of you, you've experienced it in very subtle ways. And maybe you didn't have kind of a view or lens on life and reality to put it in this sort of framework, but every single one of us has experienced it in one way, shape, form, or fashion. Much respect, Governor. Jesus himself says that the devil is the ruler of this world, and as we've talked about for several weeks, his tactic, his strategy to mess you up is through ideas, deceptive ideas, and lies. And we're going to spend today, we're all in on this talk about the devil. Are you weirded out yet? We're going to spend today and maybe one more week. We don't just give 1 week to the devil around here. We give him 5 weeks. We're serious. We're going to spend today and maybe one more week on this topic of combining the lies of the devil with the truth of Jesus, because let me tell you, this is the battleground that most of us are facing, and we probably don't have a framework for how to deal with it and think about it. And particularly this teaching on the topic of the devil, contrary to how many of us approach it, contrary to how many of us approach it, is not something where ignorance is bliss. It's just not something that ignorance is bliss, and if we ignore it, we won't experience it, because you're going to experience it either way. Let's learn how to combat it, how to deal with it, and see what Jesus says is the way to exchange lies and deception for truth. Exchange his spirit and his power, as we talked about last week, for formation that won't lead us to isolation and deception and anxiety and worry and all the stuff that we battle every day. Last week, a friend sent me a book, and if you saw my reading list and all the books I want to read, there's a lot, and they keep stacking up on our kitchen counter. because I have an addiction to Amazon, that little bar underneath it that says recommended reading based on your most recent reading. And then I listen to a podcast or I'm following something like, oh, there's 7 books that go along with that topic. Let's get all of them. At some point, I'll read or I'll listen. And so a friend sent me a book last week that, I'll be really honest, at face value, I was like, it's a little Dr. Phil-ish. Just, that's a little, I'm into that academic side of reading. I have a master's degree. That's not my jam. But I went ahead, and one night after we had put the girls down to bed and we've completed our chores, never-ending chores as a parent. No one told you that. Have kids, they said. It'll be fun, they said. Messes will clean themselves, they said. Not true. But anyways, as we finished our chores, that book was kind of around, and I just read the cover of the excerpt. I was like, that's interesting. Then I decided to give it, a quick skim read. And I was like, this is more than I thought it would be. This is a bit more interesting. So a couple nights later, I found some online stuff where the author had done some interviews and talking about it. And I just began to mine the book for some of the big ideas. And I realized that it's actually packed with practical wisdom and inspiration directly related to what we've been dealing with the last few weeks. And so I changed plans, and I'm ripping him off. And I'm basically giving you a summary of the 2 biggest ideas from his book. His name is Pastor Greg Groeschel. If you don't know who that is, but if you have, you probably have the app on your phone. It's called YouVersion Bible app. His church invented that. It's not, good stuff. And so I'm just basically going to spend the next 20 minutes and give you the 2 biggest takeaways from this book that I think are transformatively helpful for us as we continue this series. And his book is called Winning the War in Your Mind. Winning the War in Your Mind. Before we dive in, maybe you're new to this series of teaching. You're like, why are you talking about the devil? That's really weird. It's 2021. This is a figment of your religious people imaginations. Remember that one of the key building blocks of this whole series of teaching around the devil, beyond the fact that Jesus said and experienced it and said it is very, very real, is that the devil uses deceptive ideas that play to our disordered desires that are then normalized in a sinful society to just mess with you. Mess with your happiness, with your thriving, and ultimately your freedom and flourishing that we are attempting to find. And where does this start, and where does it play out, if not your mind? So question for you. Have you ever felt trapped by your own thoughts? Every day, right? This morning, 7 times already. Thoughts that have you all twisted and tied up in intellectual knots. Thoughts that induce stress and anxiety and blood pressure just when they populate in your mind. Thoughts that fight for the control of your emotions. Thoughts that tell you lies about who you are and what people say you are and what they're talking about behind your back. All those sort of things. Thoughts that just narrow your vision and your passion and your sense of purpose and mission in life at the hands of God, and they cause you to quit from God, and they cause you to quit dreaming, quit thinking. The proverb says, where there is no vision, the people perish. They cast off restraint. When there is no vision in our life, whether it be through the deceptive lies of the devil, we just lose ourselves. Thoughts that immediately bring about worry and strip you, cripple you of your confidence. Maybe you've struggled with, particularly this last year, thoughts that create tension between your faith and living in fear. Not that those are always opposed, but on a continuum, we tend to lean one direction more consistently. Maybe you struggle with thoughts that create tension between wanting to trust God and wanting to be in control. I go to bed at night, God, tomorrow is yours. Alarm goes off, first thing you do is check Facebook, someone makes you mad, I'm going to fix it. Control. The world is ending, control. Stack up, get our sources ready. We're going to take it over, man. Like, control. Maybe you have tension between having this confidence in who you are and in your calling and in your identity, but then lies get in, and there's crippling insecurity that paralyzes all kinds of momentum in your life. One of the big ideas from this book right from the start, and something that should make sense to us as it really aligns well with where we've been the last few weeks, is that your mind is a battlefield, and that most of life's battles are won or lost in your mind. This is a reality described both in Scripture and even confirmed or further explored in science. Fields of neuroscience, psychology, and even like cognitive behavioral economics. And the good news today, you ready for some more good news? I was more excited than you were. The good news this morning. Are you ready for some good news? I appreciate it. You felt the pressure. You're well, but it's okay. The good news is that God's word, the presence, the power of Jesus that has the ability to form us is more powerful. And it has the ability not just to help you and comfort you, but to transform you and renew your mind based on and with the truth of Jesus. That's the good news. Last week I quoted John Tyson. It became the kind of the framework for the teaching when he said that it's by the Spirit, which is the presence and power of God. It's by the Spirit and truth that we are transformed into the image of Christ and set free to flourish. And it's by isolation and lies that we are deformed on the other side. What gives me hope for myself, for my kids one day, for you and our church family and those that we have yet to build a bridge to. Today, even today, God's power, God's presence, and God's truth can go beyond bringing us comfort to bringing transformation, to bring renewal, to bring a new perspective, to bringing healing and help, not just ability to deal. Paul, big-time writer of the New Testament, he's a guy that moves from someone who's far, far, far from God. Like so far, he's killing the people that are close to God. He's killing those early Christians. And he progresses from there and he becomes like this fresh, new, pumped up, like a tiger just released from its cage, like Christian, all in apprentice of God. And from there, he is lighting it up in the early church. He is helping to form the movement that would expand from Jerusalem and outwards to ultimately reach us in the West. He and his life is on a similar journey that we're on. A progression from believing lies to believing truth. A progression from understanding who we are because of whose we are and dealing with all the deception that comes through life. In Romans 7, he makes a statement about the battle in his mind that I know I resonate with, and if you're being honest, I think you will as well. He basically says that I do over and over and over again that which I do not want to do, but the things I don't want to do, I can't not do them. He's stuck in a loop of doing the very things he wish he wasn't doing. And can you imagine when you're stuck in that cycle, what sort of frustration and doubt and struggle and battle that happens right here gets in us and begins to come out of us in ways that are more long-term damaging. Here's a guy who learns to move past the lies in his mind to win the battle for his mind. And here's what he says a little bit later stage in that journey in a letter to the church in Corinth in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. He says this, "For though we live in the world, we do not wage war, we do not battle as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power." Everyone say power. They have power to demolish strongholds. And that word power here in the original language is the word dunamis. It's the word that we get dynamite from. And so it's like literally miraculous, transformative, explosive power. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Somehow, Paul, through the Spirit, through the presence and the power of Christ, and the truth of his way and his message and his teaching, he is able to capture wrong thoughts and replace them with truth. He's able to capture the wrong thoughts and replace them with truth. And in turn, he wins the battle for his mind. Now, our enemy, the devil that we've been talking about, wants to create a barrier, a stronghold, a fortress, an impenetrable wall of deception and lies in your mind. That's what a stronghold does. And what does he do? He shapes your thinking, one thought, one lie at a time, until you're a prisoner of your own deception, until you are trapped by your own thoughts. What does he tell you? He tells you that you can't trust people, you'll never succeed, you'll never be in a good relationship or marriage. He tells you that God doesn't actually hear your prayers, he doesn't care, he's not listening, he's got his own thing, and you're just a pawn. Like, God doesn't actually care. You'll never make a difference, you'll never break free, you'll never break free of the destructive habits and the choices that have enslaved you. You'll never flourish. That's not for you. That's not for your family, because your family is cursed. You're stuck. Look backwards. You're not the person that's going to break those cycles. You do you. He's going to tell you, you do you. You deserve it. Just make your own choices. Go after your happiness. It will happen. So how do you battle in your mind? Here's what he tells us, very next statement. That we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive, here's what he's saying, we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Well, what does that even mean? That sounds really nice, Paul. Really great. Great to take your thoughts captive before the internet. Must have been real difficult to ignore those voices back there in the ancient world, Paul. You know, I got friends, like real friends, imaginary friends. I have thousands of followers, people that comment. I'm a big deal. Like, I got thoughts coming at me. People, things, like, must have been easier for you back in that day. I mean, not really. But I said last week, like, all of us, if we take an honest inventory, we're believing and living into some lies that we've told to ourselves about ourselves. And they're robbing you of flourishing. They're robbing you of freedom. Because good or bad, as I said last week, your life is always moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts. What you think, what you believe tends to come out, to leak out into your life. And both science and the Bible agree on this reality. In fact, the whole field and this whole study of cognitive behavioral psychology shows that a lot of problems, actual problems that we experience, are the result of wrong thinking processes in the brain. Like actual physical, neurological, chemical processes in the brain. And you can unwire that with getting the right chemical makeup to help block some things, and working with a therapist or counselor to help rewire and retool some stuff. There's options. But what they're saying is that some of the relational challenges and the eating disorders and the addictions and even some forms of anxiety, not all, are proven to be a direct result of rehearsed, toxic thinking. And that's what science says. God's word says this, that the truth that brings us ultimate freedom, like that heart, soul, mind, strength sort of freedom, the real thing from Proverbs says this, for as he thinks in his heart, so is he. For as he thinks in his heart, so is he. The life that we have is so often a reflection of the thoughts that we think. Say it again. The life that you have is often a reflection of the thoughts that you think. In other words, what you think determines who you become. What you think forms you. And we like to talk in our Western psyche about achievement and success and accomplishment and just the way that we are wired. We like to talk a lot about outcomes. Like, if I do this, this is the goal. We're goal setters and we go after it. But we don't do a whole lot of talking about the input that creates the output. And oftentimes we have lots of ideas when it comes to outputs and goals and marks of success, but we don't do the harder work to inventory the inputs that will get us there. In other words, generally speaking, if you think you can't, you probably won't. If you think you can't, you probably won't. If you think you can, you'll figure out a way to do it. I mean, isn't that ring true for you? A lot of the things that we do or do not do in life boil down to, do we have the desire to make it happen or not? Do we have the desire? And if the desire is strong enough, then we'll develop the discipline and the muscles and the thought life and the framework to make it happen. I actually listened to an interview this past week of a guy who about 15 years ago was in med school. And he read a book, in the spare time you have in med school, about a woman who holds the record for the fastest swim across the English Channel. And, a high achievement-oriented med school sort of student's like, hey, she can do it. I can do it. I want to try that. No background as an endurance athlete, no background as a swimmer, just decides in the middle of med school to tack on this to his life, and he begins to take swim lessons and train and develop those sorts of thoughts. And here's what happened, really fast-tracking the story. He ends up in the swimming world a legend. A legend. He once swam for 14 consecutive hours in the open water swimming of the Pacific Ocean, going in a triangle between 3 of the Hawaiian islands. Go to the Y later today and try to swim to the other side and back. All right? He swam between 3 Hawaiian islands for 14 hours straight, and he would be disqualified from his achievement if he ever touched a raft, a boat. The rest in the ocean was treading water, like 90 strokes a minute for 14. Just try to do that for 5 minutes straight, not moving water. 90 strokes a minute for 14 hours. The currents and the wind were so bad, like he almost missed the island because the currents were pushing him out to the sea. So it's not like you go in a straight line. Like to get from here to here, you actually have to swim like this, and then you're just kind of drifting this way. Like incredibly difficult task. He thought he could, so he did. What we think determines who we become. Today, what are you thinking about? You thinking about your problems? If you're constantly rehearsing your problems, they are going to overwhelm you. But if you begin to look for some solutions, you begin to look for a way out, you begin to look for some people, similar heart and mind that will let you belong and struggle along the way. You get in community with some people to deal with it and process your problems in, you'll experience the relief that you're looking for. You feel like a victim today? You'll likely become one if that's all you think about. And it will trap you. It will enslave you. Even if it got handed to you on a silver platter through the struggles of life. You think yourself a victim, you will become a victim, and you will pass it on. But if you believe that you can overcome by the power of Christ and the word of his testimony and what we sang about today, that the same power that raised Jesus from the grave lives in you, if you believe that and you live into that and you rehearse that and you practice that and you connect it and you live that out and embody it in community, you will overcome. And you'll become a person that becomes an advocate for all the victims around you. And it won't help, it will flow out of your life naturally because you woke up one day and didn't decide to swim a triangle between the Hawaiian Islands, but something much more insurmountable on the inside was dealt with. It was dealt with in community and with practice and in connection by the Spirit and the power and the presence and the truth of Jesus Christ. In so many ways, the life that you have is a reflection of the thoughts that you think. When is the last time that you paused and slowed down and removed enough distractions and you started to think about what you're thinking about? Not just think your way to better a life, but you're thinking about what you're thinking about. You're doing an honest inventory, an honest assessment. If you were to do that, would you say that your thoughts are characterized by worry and by panic and by fear? Or would you say that they are typically characterized by the peace that passes all understanding that is found in Jesus Christ? Do your thoughts drift over and over towards the negative, or do they drift towards the positive? Well, you don't understand, Matt. Like, life has happened to me. I'm just always been like a glass half full, if there's even a glass sort of guy. Just the way I look at life. Well, yeah, if that's the way you look at life, that's what you're going to experience. You're going to experience in every interaction. You're someone that brings that sort of framework to life. Like, how do relationships actually flourish if that's your framework? Like, if that's my outlook towards life, the moment that Eliza and I, or my wife and I, have a little bit of a disagreement, the way that I deal with that is going to be far different. The the way I internalized that, and the way that I would lash back out at that would be so different. That if I'm like, you know what? Jesus is with me. There's some things that aren't right, but my life isn't negative. There's this thing that living in apprenticeship with Jesus, it's always moving in the forward, positive direction. Do you wake up and believe the best in people, or are you just looking to be messed with? Are you looking to be offended? Are you looking to take what someone says so you can feel better about yourself? Are you looking to disagree so we can paint a clearer picture of our own goodness? Guess what? In a deeper and much more meaningful way, for all of you that are like, man, this is really self-helpy, Matt. Like, it's a struggle for me to talk about it this far without giving this disclaimer. In a deeper and much more meaningful way than the ultimately dead end of mindfulness or just positivity or putting out good vibes in the world or watching a really helpful Dr. Phil episode. Does anyone still watch Dr. Phil? Or following the right like positive influencer on Instagram who you're seeing her stories every day, and man, she's momming it right. She's momming it hard. She's dealing with the negativity. She's working. She's clean, like whatever the things are. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong. But if that's the extent of the positive input that you're putting into your life, it is ultimately a dead end. And it will cycle back to less and less flourishing because at the end of the day, you're left with yourself. In a much deeper way, the battle in your mind that creates the patterns of your thinking, like this actually does matter. It actually does matter. More than the cultural narrative and story around this topic. More than the yoga class. More than the right Instagram follow. More than the right planner to get things organized. More than the right mop to get your kitchen right. Like all the things. More than the right workout and Bowflex and diet. More than the right things. This actually does matter. Anybody feel offended by the mop comment? We got the right mop from an Instagram influencer. And I will say, at a surface level, pun intended, it is transformative. 3 of you got that pun. At a surface level, it is thank you, Ellie. It is transformative. Here's the deal. What comes into your mind comes out in your life. No matter what you do, what you have, where you live, what you wear, the amount of money, where you go, you cannot have a positive life and have a negative mind because your life is always heading in the direction of your strongest thoughts. So, are you excited about the thoughts you're thinking? Awesome. Get with this guy. Get with Rob. Come talk to him. You just found 20 people that you are now a life coach towards. Are you excited about the direction of your thoughts? Are you even aware of the thoughts, of the lies, of the truth that you are thinking? Back to the book. Here's what he offers as a two steps to deal with this. Number 1, you have to identify the biggest stronghold that's holding you back. You cannot defeat what you don't define. You can't defeat what you don't define. What is it that you think over and over and over again? Which direction on the continuum from worry to peace, from negativity to positivity, from obsessing about the worldly and the temporary or the things of the kingdom that lasts forever? Where do you find yourself more often leaning? You may be repeating to yourself over and over and over things like, I'm just not good enough. When I was in elementary school, before I really hit my athletic prowess, and I was the guy you wanted on your team, I was consistently, I still struggle with it. Before the building was built, it happened just right out there, guys, where there's a playground. There's this place needs a lot of redemption in my heart. And I was the guy that would be picked towards the end for the playground dodgeball. I didn't understand why. I practiced. Went out in the front yard with my dad. We're like working on the throws. I definitely threw better than Jared, who threw like a short-handed little weird thing. I was working on it. And yes, it's true, Jared. And somehow he made All-Stars. This is all political. We don't need to talk about it. But I worked on it. And what's weird, what's honestly weird is that in 3rd grade, where I got picked on the team messed with my sense of who I was. And that's a third grade example, but we've all been there. You didn't get included in that group text? Well, that's not just a middle school thing. Like, that happens as adults. Like, what happened? Did they start a new group text that I'm not in anymore? Like, that happens. And it gets in our skin, under our skin, and we think about it, and we rehearse it. You may be thinking, like, my past is too bad for God to use. I'll never be in a job that's fulfilling, over and over and over again. More deeply than the quotable meme floating around Facebook or the copied and pasted caption with a nice selfie. Love you. If you find yourself consistently rehearsing, self-pitying, self-grandizing, negative thoughts, those negative thoughts will do something more. They will actually do something physiological, as those thoughts will create new pathways and neural pathways that will rewire the way you think. And for a second, science lesson. When you think a positive thought, it actually, like, you actually get a surge of a rewarding neurotransmitters that release a very legal and very exciting drug called dopamine. It's legal, and it's powerful, and it's accessible, and find it. And literally every time that you have a positive thought, you get this hit, this buzz of dopamine. Someone comments the right thing on your latest family post. They share it, they like it, boom, dopamine. Supplement compliments your outfit, compliments your work, they validate who you are a little bit. Dopamine, it releases. What's interesting is that the more often you think a thought, science actually tells us it is easier to think that thought again. Once you think a thought, you're creating neural pathways in your brain, and literally we have billions of neural pathways or roads in our brains. The more often you think it, the more often it becomes the default. Think of it this way. We've been doing some house on our work. We've been doing some work on our house that we didn't sell a couple years, and it's been a rental property. And more on that in a second. And we're trying to get it ready for to sell. And when we lived there and we had a dog, I hung like 100-foot lead from a fence to the furthest tree I could do because I just wanted to make him happy, but also not him run away. It's still hanging there for whatever reason. Through 2 tenants in that house, it's still hanging there. And when Dexter, our dog's name, when he lived there and we'd let him out, thousands of times over the course of his lifetime there, he had access 15 feet either side, like 100-foot lead that he could go on. But what did he do? He walked the same narrow path over and over and over again to get to the area he'd use his bathroom, and he walked right out. And what emerged? A trail. And that's literally like what happens in our brain. The more we think thoughts, the more worn down and strong those thoughts become. But the less we think them, the more it weakens those pathways. This is what's happening in our minds. And some of you need to learn to be formed by God's power and presence and His truth to retrain your brain away from the default path of lies and onto a new path that leads towards truth. There's a clinical psychologist that I follow. Amazing book. If I can ever get him to come speak here, I want to bring him for a weekend. But he talks a lot about the concept of shame and how storytelling is your way out of it. Telling your story is your way to help break the strongholds of shame, because by telling your story, you are rewiring your brain not to take the same path towards experiencing that trauma or that negativity over again, but rewiring to have a different outlook on it, to see it for what it's done in your life, how it's helped you, and how it's helped bring you out. Amazing research that one day he can say from right here to you. The more that you walk the path, the easier it is to travel. So you first identified the stronghold holding you back. Just one, though. You may have 27. You'll discover. I have 42. And I just made that up. But just one. Give yourself some grace. Just focus on one for a minute. Go after one. So you've identified that. And now that you've identified it, because you have to identify it because it's the only way towards defeating it. Now you're ready to do this. You're ready to name the truth that demolishes that stronghold. Name the truth that demolishes that stronghold. Why does truth matter? Because Jesus said it in John 8. We've read it almost every week. That you will know the truth, and the truth will what? It will set you free. Set you free. Lies enslave you and put you into spiritual bondage. But if you know the truth will set you free. How? Because truth demolishes strongholds. It unravels lies. It integrates your soul, your mind, your body, your loves, your desires, your affections. I mean, this past week, when the sun came out and the snow melted and you got out of your house or out of your car, how many of you did this number? Or some of you without the ability to get to Tudor's for a couple days, you got there, you took a bite of your bacon biscuit, and you went, I know I shouldn't be eating this, but thank God for Tudor's. Some of you were there. I saw you. I was one of those terrible people. But you experienced that. That's what truth does to the internal life. That's what truth is. That's what truth is. You might remember last week that I closed with a story about the famous escape artist Houdini. And he was heading to town, and he did this thing in the jail cell where he would break out. And the jailer messed with him by actually flipping the lock. And so as Houdini is trying to unlock, he's actually locking it over and over again. Some of us, some of you, some people you know and you deeply care about are living in the realm of frustration because you think you are a prisoner of your own thinking. You think you are stuck behind a locked door, stuck in a mind of lies, when actually the door is or can be unlocked with and truth and freedom are actually within reach. It's accessible, and with the power of God, it is ready to set you free. Paul said that we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Some of you today need to be set free. You just need to be set free from the prisons of your own thinking. Some of you need to identify to do the difficult task, the messy task, but the meaningful, transformative task of identifying the lies that you have been telling yourself, of identifying the untruths and the half-truths and the manipulations and the posturing of people around you that have just brought you to a place of without a word for it, like you feel it, you know it. And you need to exchange it for the truth of who God says you are. Remember the true story of Ignaz Semelweis? Iggy? Now known as a pioneer of germs. The second part of his story is that after he identified the stronghold, after he identified the problem leading to the great discrepancy in death rates between the two delivery rooms, after he discovered what would later become known as the germ, he not only diagnosed the problem, but he found the solution. And that solution that he introduced is still practiced today. And it is mind-blowingly, almost laughably simple. Is to wash your hands. Think about that. The difference between life and death was washing your hands. So simple, so accessible, so mind-numbingly obvious that if practiced or being in that environment so long just becomes almost irrelevant and it lacks its power. It was hand washing. Just wash your hands and live. Wash your hands and live. Think about it. He eradicated this stronghold, this silent killer of germs leading to preventable disease and death through hand washing. And at the risk of giving an overly simple solution to a vastly complex history and problem for you, In great love, some of you are flat out too comfortable and familiar with this and familiar with God. It's so habitual that it is meaningless. It's so culturally normal. It's a thing you do, not a person that you are. Some of you are great at reciting the right information about who God is, but we are missing what matters most, the hand washing of the soul, the transformation that only comes by renewing our minds and knowing and experiencing Jesus for ourselves. My point is that the only way that you can exchange the lies battling in your mind for the truth of Jesus is to actually and truly experience Jesus for yourself. We could sing songs from now until eternity, and unless they get in you, and unless you experience it, they will not transform you. They will comfort you, they will feel nice, and you may become a better singer, but it will not transform you. We need God's Spirit, His presence, and His power, and we need His truth. Band, come out. In a reversal of the previous statement, we're going to sing our way out today. But some of you need to take the step to make your faith more personal. Remember that spiritual disciplines, the practices of Jesus, that we will make the focus of our life and conversation and my teaching from now until it's over. That is spiritual warfare. To be with Jesus. To be with Jesus. And by being with Him, we become like Him. And by becoming like Him, we do what He would do. And sometimes in doing what He would do, we're becoming like Him. And sometimes in becoming like Him, we're being with Him. And it all kind of cohabitates to create this life that sets you up to live and revel in the truth of who you already are in Jesus Christ. So we're getting this house ready at Bills Creek. We had a tenant in the home, and the tenant was planning to buy the home, and it fell through in kind of a dramatic way. And so we got access back to this house of ours that we lived in for the first couple of years of our marriage, and it's been a rental property. We got access back into the house last Saturday. And let me tell you, it wasn't a wreck in the sense of like holes in walls and ripped up floors, but it's a wreck. It's so dirty that it's rusting things in the house, like dust on things is corroding things. It's gross. It stinks. It's not been taken care of. And it got me to thinking about the parallel here to the difference between someone who's just renting a property and showing up, and the mentality that we have is walking in as the owners. And I see the details today. I see every piece of dirt, and it's driving me crazy. And I want it out. I want it out of that house. I want things to be new. I want things to be clean. I want things to have a fresh start. I want there to be freedom in that house, not the filth of struggle and the filth of decay at the lies of whatever was happening in that home. Our attitudes towards our faith and to life are profoundly different when you view things through the lens of a renter or the lens of an owner. Serious question today. Do you have a renter's mentality when it comes to your faith? Do you have a renter's mentality when it comes to your apprenticeship with Jesus? And I understand it is a process, it is a journey, and I'm not saying everyone's supposed to be on the same roadmap at the same time. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that wherever you are today, that next step needs to be not to be a better renter, but to become an owner. Not just to clean some stuff as a renter that's never going to own it, face the burden of it, do what Jesus would do it down the road. in our shift, the fundamental shift of learning to live out of truth instead of lies and deception, may have something significantly to do in your life with transforming and asking God to transform you from the inside out to someone who is renting your faith or living vicariously through your parents or through your friends or through what I say on a Sunday or through the worship that makes us feel good. Praise God for all those things. They're going to continue to be forever more. But at some point, the truth has to become owned in our hearts and in our minds if you are going to see the transformation and the renewing of your mind that will put to rest the lies and the enemies of your soul. That is our responsibility. That is our act of faith towards God. And guess what is good news? Is that it is God that does the work. We just ask Him to do it. We say, God, come do this in me. Transform me. Take a little bit of a step. Heal me. Help me. Give me grace. Give me a sense of your love. And He is faithful to do it. Some of you don't need any more church, any more Bible reading plans. You don't need any more worship services. We just need to own this thing. And if we're going to make a difference that God would have, in our partnership with God, in our partnership with one another, living this thing out as a church family on mission together, where we are a refuge for people that need healing, we are a refuge for people that need connection and family, that we have an outlook on life that treats every neighbor not as enemies, but as sons and daughters of God. If we're going to do that, we got to own some things. So you want to exchange some lies for truth today? Identify your stronghold. Name the truth that demolishes it and experience Jesus for yourself. And guess what? I want to be right there with you. There are people in here that want to be right there with you. No one's saying go figure it out on your own. Just saying, experience Jesus for yourself and find the freedom from the prison of your own thoughts. Would you stand? God, in the areas where we need to identify strongholds, maybe right now you're going to put something in our mind and heart that is obvious. Or maybe you would ask us to go home and do inventory and practice some solitude and silence and listen to you and become more aware of our own struggle. God, I pray that you would do that. For those that need to begin to speak truth and to live in truth and find connection to truth, that you will use this, you will use us, you will use relationships to get people to that truth. God, and really all that matters is that we would experience Jesus for ourselves, that we'd experience you for ourselves. God, we praise you that your name is more powerful, that you have no rivals. Your enemy may be strong, but you are stronger. The strongholds that are in our lives are no match for your power, for your presence, and for your truth. And today, for those that need that are struggling for that, give it to them. God, would they ask it? And I pray that today, whatever needs healed, what peace needs to come, what perspective needs to come, what transformation needs to come, what renewal needs to come, what hope and passion and purpose needs to return, what hurt needs to be healed, and what habit needs to be moved on from, that you will help us to own it because it is your spirit, it is your power, it is your truth that will set us free to transform us and put to death and send to hell the lies of the devil. Would you take them right back to where it came from and renew our minds today as we sing about your power and your presence?